Hello, everyone, and welcome to our final Visiting Writer Series for the fall 2020 semester. I really appreciate all of you coming today to celebrate Dave Mullins. Hi. So when you logged on, I set it up so that everybody is muted right away so that during the reading, things can stay as quiet as possible for him. If you have a question, please go ahead and put that in chat at the bottom of the screen, and we will address those as Dave has time for them. But we will catch all of them. Thank you again, everybody, for coming, and I want to hand it over to Chad to introduce our guest.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bonnie. All right, Dave, it's good to have you. I'm going to read a little bit of Dave's bio here. David Philip Mullins is the author of The Brightest Place in the World, his latest novel, and Greetings from Below, a story collection that won both the Mary McCarthy Prize in Short Fiction and the International Walter Scott Prize for Short Stories. He's a graduate of Iowa Writers Workshop, and his work has appeared in the Yale Review, the Massachusetts Review, New England Review, Cimarron Review, Ecotone, Third Coast, Fiction, Folio, Post Road, Gulf Coast, and the anthology Road to Nowhere and Other News Stories from the Southwest. He has received a creative writing fellowship from the National Endowments for the Arts, the Dorothy Granville Hicks Residency in Literature at Yaddo, a Sustainable Arts Foundation Award, a Stanley Elkin Scholarship from Sewanee Writers Conference, and an Individual Artist Fellowship in Literature from the Nebraska Arts Council, and the Silver Pen Award from the Nevada Writers Hall of Fame. He's an Associate Professor of English at Creighton University and an all-around rock star. So we were extremely happy, Dave, to have you here and to hear from your latest work.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chad. I really appreciate that kind introduction. Thank you too, Bonnie. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you both for setting this up. And big thanks to both institutions as well, and appreciate all of the attendees tuning in this afternoon. So I'll tell you a little bit about the genesis of The Brightest Place in the World, and then I'll read a few of the beginning chapters from it. When I grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada, where most of the book is set. And when I was in 8th grade, the plant that my father worked for, he was an electrical engineer, and the plant that he worked for was based out in the Nevada desert in the Mojave, about half an hour or so outside the city. And in 1988, May of 1988, when I was in 8th grade, my dad's plant blew up, to be blunt. It manufactured a product called ammonium perchlorate, which is this highly combustible oxidizer that the military used to use for ballistic missile engines, and the space shuttle program used it as well. And after the Challenger disaster in the 1980s, NASA stopped buying this product from my dad's plant, my dad's company, but they kept producing it because they didn't want to lay anybody off. And so they had tons and tons of these polyethylene drums of this stuff in a parking lot because they didn't know what to do with it. And what happened was one day a spark from a welding torch flew into one of these drums, caused an explosion, which set off a chain reaction. And the largest explosion registered 3.5 on the Richter scale.
Oh my God.
And it was pretty intense. It was, for lack of a better way to describe it, it was kind of this mini 9/11 in the Las Vegas community at the time. Only 2 people died miraculously because it was right in the middle of the day, and a lot of people were away at work and at school. And so the homes that were leveled around the plant, most of them were empty at the time. My father managed to evacuate all of his men, and most of the other plant managers did as well. So the 2 people who died were 2 people who could not get out of the plant. So when I decided to try a novel, I was kind of thinking of what I wanted to write about for months and months and months. I just wanted to write a novel, but I had no ideas. And finally, I decided to use that explosion that my father lived through as kind of the initiating event for a longer narrative. So my novel begins with a fictionalized version of that event. In the book, the plant is called WEPCO, the Western Engineering and Production Company. The book ends up tracing the lives of 4 characters who are kind of survivors of the event, in the sense that they're dealing with the aftermath of it. In the novel, one of the people who dies is a character named Andrew Huntley, so he dies in the explosion. And then the book traces 4 people who knew him intimately. And you watch how their lives overlap and intersect throughout the course of the book. So the 4 chapters that I'll read are the first 4 chapters of the novel, and they introduce you to those 4 principal characters. They're not very long. I know 4 chapters sounds daunting. They're fairly short. And if you have any questions at all during the reading, please feel free to put them in the chat room, or in the chat box down low, and I'll check. And I'd be happy to take a break and kind of address any questions you might have during the reading. And absolutely afterward, I'd love to answer any questions you have as well. I think that's about all you need to know. The first chapter is about the character named Russell. And so Russell was Andrew Huntley's best friend. So Andrew Huntley is the guy who dies in the explosion. Russell was his best friend. And I'll kind of explain who each character is and how they relate to each other as I get to the other ones. So this chapter is called Russell. Oh, and I can't forget my glasses. I'm old now. I'm 46, so I can't read without these things. He spots the smoke off to the south, 9 or 10 miles away, maybe more. A dark cloud bellies out over the country clubs and subdivisions that have come to occupy the once vacant periphery of the valley. He merges into the fast lane, lifts his glasses to his forehead, the better to see. The cloud moves swiftly, and he leans forward to follow its course, watching the interstate from the corner of his eye. High above the mountains to the east, a blue stretch of air is split horizontally by the chalk-lined contrail of a jet plane. In no time at all, the smoke erases the plane's condensation from the sky, making its broad, black way toward Lake Mead and the Arizona border. Moments earlier, the sound startled him, crashing like a wave, deep and resonant. It's quiet now, and Russell listens to a headwind push steadily at the windshield, to the hollow drone of tires against pavement. He wonders, in the stillness of the front seat, if some sort of bomb has gone off at one of the far-flung casinos of South Las Vegas. Ever since 9/11, there's been talk of potential attacks on the city. A few resorts on the Strip still searching backpacks and handbags on New Year's Eve and the 4th of July, hampering the crowded entrances with metal detectors and armed guards. And I should stop and say this is set in 2012, by the way. So about 11 years after 9/11. The glare of a mid-morning sun gives the interstate a kind of waxen luster that almost blinds him if he pays attention to it. An odor of exhaust permeates the atmosphere of his little sedan, charter buses and 18-wheelers making canyons of the lanes. Russell lowers the passenger side window and squints out at the cloud of smoke, whose proportions suddenly double before his eyes. And then he hears it again, the very same sound, like a clap of thunder, like cannon fire at a football game, followed this time by a series of pops. They keep coming, pop, 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 each one louder, clearer than the last. He feels a throb of apprehension, then the guilty relief that comes whenever catastrophe strikes a remote region of the world, that unsavory sense of security brought about by the misfortunes of strangers. Unlike those who might have already perished in the explosions or the ensuing fire, he is still alive. He raises the window and speeds up to 70, tailgating an old Ford Mustang, reasoning that a terrorist targets would be the MGM or Bellagio or the Venetian, Fremont Street or Nellis Air Force Base, places of size and prominence, not a little-known edge of the valley. It's 10:30, a gusty Tuesday in May, and Russell is heading south on 515, on his way home from the All or Nothing, after 12 straight hours tending bar. A shift and a half, because money's tight. He's a good deal stoned, as he often is during his drive back from the tavern. Weed calms him, and Russell needs to be calmed, each and every day. Sometimes, as a matter of course, it has the opposite effect, making him fearful. It seems to be doing so this morning, for he finds himself concerned about Emma, his wife, who's having brunch with a girlfriend downtown, many miles in the other direction. She's perfectly safe. The assumption appeases his fear, and he slows the Corolla and merges back into the middle lane. He turned off the radio after the first explosion, and now Russell turns it back on, scanning the AM news stations until he hears mention of the fire. The exact location is unknown, a reporter explains in a slow, hardened voice. Somewhere in the desert southeast of Las Vegas, the man says, possibly a chemical plant. And before he can add another word, Russell feels a prickly tension across his forehead and around his ears, a crown of dread. Something in his stomach tautens like a cord. The Webco plant, where his friend Andrew works. It's out that way, just beyond the city. He's known Andrew since middle school, where they shared a homeroom, their friendship a constant for the past 30 years. Russell, an only child, has always thought of him as a brother. He digs around on the console for a tissue, blinking as he steers the Corolla back into the fast lane. His left eye waters when he's anxious, and he lifts his glasses again and dabs at it. The reporter's voice turning soft and indistinct, held for Russell in some kind of abeyance, there and not there. The air conditioner whirs, and the wind pushes harder at the windshield. Traffic zips along as if nothing has happened. The smoke continues over the mountains, drifting higher into the sky. From the pocket of his shirt, he fingers his lighter and the joint he rolled the day before, a half-smoked pinner containing the last of his supply. For as long as Russell can recall, he suffered from unpredictable panic attacks that not only start his eye watering, but also cause his mouth to dry up and his hands to tremble furiously. His temples will grow slick with sweat, and for minutes on end, he'll sit wheezing as though he's sucking air through a penny whistle. Cannabis, when it does its job, is both a neutralizer and a preventive. He toked the first half of the joint at work on his way out of the parking lot. Now he lights the second half and inhales. He smokes it down to a roach and then stubs it out in the ashtray. The plant produces a chemical called ammonium perchlorate, an oxidizer for rocket fuel, though Andrew has no background in chemistry or any other science. He's a maintenance technician and has been with WEPCO, the Western Engineering and Production Company, for the past 7 or so years. It's among a handful of chemical plants in that part of the desert, with their turbines and storage tanks and great warrens of above-ground piping, slender smokestacks aimed like howitzers at the sky, white plumes mingling above. There's a marshmallow factory out there as well, a factory that manufactures an edible product right in the middle of a bunch of chemical plants. Russell can just imagine the range of hazardous substances stored within the confines of such places. What negligent or unscrupulous activity occurs? Not that Andrew himself would ever be responsible. Who knows to what degree there are secretions of the local ecosystem. It was a matter of time, Russell supposes, before something exploded. He keeps south on the interstate, his thoughts turning to Andrew's house, which isn't very far from the plants. Russell wonders about Juliet, Andrew's wife, and about Maddie, their daughter. Are they in harm's way? Juliet, an art therapist, should be at her office by now. Maddie should be in class, her high school a safe enough distance to the north. Maybe he's overreacting. He's hopped up. His brain isn't right, isn't operating the way it's supposed to. I'm panicked, Russell thinks, in a state, jumping to conclusions. He has no idea if the explosions have in fact taken place at WEPCO, or, despite the news station's hypothesis, at any of the plants at all. Smoke has consumed much of the air above the mountains, bulking like an enormous rain cloud. Anyone in the vicinity, says the man on the radio, should take immediate shelter. No sooner has the reporter concluded his warning than Russell hears 5 or 6 more pops, accompanied by another crash of sound. He feels this one in his seat, a hard double jouncing, as if the car has passed too quickly over a speed bump. Andrew, he says, not quite aloud, smoke sweeping upward in a thick black column tinged with rose. Russell exits the interstate and drives in the direction of Andrew's neighborhood, the whole southeastern sky rolling and fattening, clouds expanding into clouds. So chapter 2 is titled Emma, and again, as chapter 1 references, Emma is Russell's wife, and this is the introduction to her character in the novel. She crawls from beneath the table, minding the placement of her hands and knees to find the dining room covered in glass. Glass on the carpet, the chairs, glass on the tabletop, the hutch, the leaves of a potted gardenia. She felt the shower of it against her shoulders and back. She heard it spray the furniture, but she's astonished to see so much. All 4 windows gone. Gingerly, Emma stands up and shrugs the flannel blanket from her shoulders, running her fingers over her arms and legs and face. Thanks to the blanket, there isn't a scratch on her, even though she wears nothing more than spandex cycling shorts and a cotton tank top. The chandelier, loosed from the ceiling, swings in a tired circle from 2 twisted wires, the bases of its 8 tiny bulbs, headless in their sockets. Fragments of glass stick to the wall and flicker like crystals in the orange morning light. She steps with care to one of the empty window frames and peers outside. Smoke darkens the sky. A towering fire rages below. One of the plants in flames. Which one, though? Which one? It's impossible to tell. Near as they are, the distance is still too great, the smoke too dense. A reddish black pall in the shape of a cauliflower. Emma tiptoes through the house, searching in her white ankle socks for a phone and her tennis shoes. Glass everywhere. On the kitchen countertops, on the armchairs and end tables, arrayed in an abstract mosaic across the ceramic tile in the entryway. Knives of it, splinters, razor-edged sections the size of dinner plates. As far as she can tell, no window has been left unbroken, no vase or picture frame. Each room looks as it might in the wake of a powerful earthquake. She can't catch her breath, though it's no exertion at all to walk so delicately from room to room. Emma feels as though she's in a semi-conscious state. She is outside herself, she thinks. Is that what people call it? There's a ringing in her ears, and she feels momentarily like she's lost. Lost in this house she knows so well. Everything a little murky all of a sudden, foreign looking in some frightful way. Has she sustained an injury to the head? She touches her face again, smooths her palms slowly over her skull. No lumps, no blood. Her search for shoes and a phone seems a rational, self-orienting task, but she keeps having the strange sense that her thoughts are not her own, that they belong to someone else, and Emma moves aimlessly around the living room, hardly looking. They are in the spare bedroom, her Nikes. She remembers now. She took them off, as she sometimes does, while riding the stationary bike, feeling lighter without them, before the explosions began, before she grabbed the blanket from a linen closet and hurried to the dining room for cover. Emma makes her way down the hall. Once or twice she missteps and a shard of glass crunches like a corn chip under the ball of her foot, though her socks remain untorn, her feet uncut. In the spare bedroom, she pulls on her shoes, leaving the laces untied. The ringing in her ears has abated, replaced by a sharp whisking sensation, a fretful feeling at the back of her tongue. She finds the cordless phone on a nightstand in the master bedroom. She dials Andrew's cell phone and gets his voicemail. Emma bites her lip and tries the number again. This time, a computerized voice tells her that all the circuits are busy. She dials 911. It's the only other thing she can think to do, telling the dispatcher there's been an accident. Explosions, she says, absurdly. A fire. The WEPCO plant? The dispatcher asks, clearing his throat. Emma feels a flush of heat in her neck. We're aware of the situation, ma'am. Are you hurt? He speaks slowly, as if to a child or a drunk. I'm not hurt, no, she says. You don't have to send anyone. I'm hanging up now, Emma says, and hangs up. Back in the living room, she turns on the television. An aerial view of the plant. Fire and smoke. So much smoke. A close-up of what she saw from the dining room. Abandoned automobiles, dented or windowless or overturned, obstruct the narrow roads that curve like tributaries through the flat sepia terrain. Studying the screen, Emma looks for Andrew among them, looks for his dark blue Sonata, but can see no one, can spot no car that resembles his. There are no paramedics, no police officers, no firefighters, nothing but flames and smoke. A holocaustal tableau that puts Emma in mind of before and after images she once saw of a mock town built for destruction and survivability evaluations by the Nevada test site. The first image depicting houses, commercial buildings, automobiles, even mannequins. The second, only the charred, mangled husks of a few cars and trucks, desert earth smoldering around them. The surrounding chemical plants are more or less okay, says the reporter, overwrought, while the Meyerowitz marshmallow factory, just down the road from WEPCO, has been leveled. The number of fatalities, if there are any, is not yet known. Because of the immensity of the flames, he explains, because of their extraordinary heat, firefighters cannot approach the WEPCO plant until the fire dies down. Emma takes a breath. Where's Russell? On his way home from the tavern? Home already? He isn't at risk, she thinks, either way. She closes her eyes, rubs the back of her neck. This is happening, she thinks. This is real. Outside, neighbors stand open-mouthed in doorways, watching the sky. Others mill about in the street, women mostly, only a few men. High above them to the east, a massive ceiling of smoke. They observe it with tilted heads, with looks of hysteria and wonderment, as though it's a UFO about to touch down. Mother of God, one of them says, cradling a blood-glazed arm. Is everybody all right? Says another. Emma watches dreamily as a snow of ash wafts through the air. Despite the condition of the windows, she turns and locks the front door. She has to look for Andrew. She has to find out if Andrew is okay. The ash powders his driveway and his sidewalk and is all over the little patch of grass in front of his house, seeming to accumulate more heavily there, the green lengths of blades poking through. It carries a smell she can't quite place. Behind the wheel of her Civic, Emma lowers the windows, which are miraculously intact, and sniffs the air. The smell is sweet and familiar and conjures a brief, hazy nostalgia. She knows what it is. Marshmallow. The smell is roasted marshmallow. So that's Emma's chapter. As you may have guessed, so Emma is having an affair with Andrew. So Andrew, again, is one of the people who dies in the explosion. And again, that's Russell's best friend. So Russell thinks she's downtown when this happens. And in fact, she was at Andrew's house waiting for him to come home and meet her for lunch that day. Are there any questions before I go on and read the next two? I'll kind of check the chat room here. Okay, I don't see anything. So I will continue. Okay, so the next chapter is called Simon. So Simon is he's a manager at the plant who had the opportunity to save Andrew's life. So he starts to speed away in a pickup truck, and he could have picked Andrew up and saved him, but he keeps going. So his kind of narrative in the book is that he feels this intense guilt over not saving Andrew's life when he finds out that Andrew has died. Simon. The pickup ticks softly in the late morning heat, perched atop a sandy bluff that overlooks a wide plain of rain-shadowed desert. He considers the modest beauty of the Mojave, its clean and muted loveliness, distracting himself, keeping his mind from circling back to the plant and the explosions and poor Andrew Huntley. He sits studying the land, a marvel, as one might a work of art in the solitude of a gallery. He feels a deep-rooted connection to these flat, quiet expanses just outside the city. What has he done? He can't allow himself to think about it. Simon crosses his eyes and the landscape blurs. He is sorely thirsty. His pants are torn, stained with blood that leaks from the gash in his leg. His hands are tired from clutching the wheel as he sped eastward through the roadless desert. Deep within his ears, the sound of bubbles rising in a water cooler bottle. In spite of these things, it is, in a sense, like meditating, staring this way into the openness before him, a dismissal of his self-reproach, an escape. He fights the temptation to remove himself from this state, to lift his eyes to the fire in the distance. It swells in the periphery of his vision, but he won't look at it. He turns his attention to the rearview mirror. It's cockeyed and dust-covered, and Simon straightens it, wipes it clean with the heel of his hand. His entire face stings as though razor-nicked, and he examines his reflection. The cuts, little blood-darkened slashes, are all over his cheeks and nose and forehead. He looks deeply into his own two eyes, whose color he's always liked, but now seems deceptive and ugly, a silvery, fish-scale blue. Cowardly eyes, he thinks, marked in some uncertain way by weakness. He is a coward. He has always known this, a secret he's kept since childhood, and now, as a consequence, a man's life has been lost. Simon fears so, at least. He can't stop his mind from returning to this unsettling place. He feels the need to weep, yet no tears fall, held in reserve behind his eyes. Broken glass blankets the dashboard, the side windows blown out, the rear window as well. Somehow the windshield is still in one piece, fractured in places, though holding to the frame. Leaning forward, Simon can see the right front fender is flattened. The passenger side door hangs open, bent nearly in half. He unbuttons his shirt, slips out of it, and wraps it tightly around his thigh, wincing as he knots the sleeves over the gash. Simon isn't sure what caused it. Something airborne during the first explosion, he thinks. A piece of shrapnel rocketing toward him as he climbed into the pickup. He felt nothing, anesthetized by adrenaline. Only now does the pain set in, an edgeless gnawing that works its way into his knee and down through his shin. The fire spread too quickly to be extinguished. As the alarms rang out, people scrambled for automobiles, piling in and racing off through the desert. And this, by the way, is a detail from what my father told me the night of the actual explosion. So one of the things that made me want to write about this is it kind of lingered in my head for years and years and years, a conversation that I had with my dad. So like I said, I was in 8th grade at the time, and he came home that night and he had been in the hospital from the injuries he'd received, a lot of cuts. And he was in the bathroom and he was just full of dust and dirt, soot, and he was washing up in the bathroom. And I remember he dried his face and he just started crying. And I was standing there watching him in the doorway. And I had never really seen my dad cry anymore or cry before. And he gave me a hug and hugged me tightly and just kept saying over and over again, those men didn't have to die. And these were 2 friends of his who died. And I had just never seen that kind of emotion from him. And that memory stayed with me for years. And the impetus to write about the experience was actually, interestingly enough, much less about the explosion itself than that moment with my dad in the bathroom. And that scene is never in the book. I didn't fictionalize it or write about it in any way, but it is kind of the thing that got me writing about the explosion in the first place. The reason my dad was injured and the reason he was all covered in cuts was that after he had evacuated all of his men, he knew, as all the managers knew, that the whole thing was going to go up. There was no stopping this chain reaction. So they all jumped in trucks and cars. My dad jumped in someone else's truck, and someone gave him the keys and jumped in the passenger seat, the guy he knew, and they just sped off through the desert, no roads or anything. And while he was speeding through the desert, the third and largest explosion hit. And he said that the whole truck was just lifted off the ground. And he didn't hear anything at first. And then he heard the explosion, all the windows blew out, and the truck landed, and a lot of the wheel, I think 3 of the wheels blew, and they just kept speeding on rims through the desert until they get far enough away from it. So this is an actual detail from what happened. And in fact, a lot of the descriptions of the explosion are based on things my dad told me, and based on a History Channel documentary that they did of the Pepcon explosion. So if you want to watch it, if you're curious about the actual explosion, there's a lot online about it that you can find. Okay, anyhow. The fire spread too quickly to be extinguished. As the alarms rang out, people scrambled for automobiles, piling in and racing off through the desert. Simon stayed behind longer than he should have to make sure all of his men had evacuated. He was alone in the pickup, 50 yards or so from the plant, when he saw Andrew Huntley in the rearview mirror, running after him and waving an arm. Simon thought briefly about stopping. He knew that if he did, he might never see his wife and children again, might never see his house again, or his big kidney-shaped pool, or his new Trek touring bike. He held his foot to the accelerator. The second explosion was twice as loud as the first, deafening. The pickup had been lifted into the air by the time he heard it. And when it landed, glass was coming at him, and he closed his eyes. And when he opened them, the truck was out of control, and the passenger side door was dangling wedge-shaped from a hinge. And in the mirror, Andrew Huntley was gone, replaced by a wheeling mass of dust and smoke. The world was dust and smoke, and the rumbling clamor of destruction, and nothing more. Simon got control of the pickup. A couple of miles out, he turned it around, fishtailing, and ascended the bluff. It was from here that he watched the third explosion, the largest. And as the shockwave rippled toward him through the dirt, As he braced for it, he was positive he had enough time to stop for Andrew Huntley. Now, against his injured leg, Simon feels the vibration of his cell phone. He arches his back into the seat and digs the phone from his pocket. Rebecca, and that's Simon's wife. I'm okay, he answers. I'm all right, hon. She's crying. Thank God, she says. Thank you, God. She cries harder, sniffling into the phone. Hey, he says, honey, I'm alive. The noise is still there in his ears, thick and toneless, more of a gulping sound now. He can barely hear her. Where are you? His wife asks him. In the desert, in the truck. I just drove. I kept calling, but I couldn't get through, she says. I thought, hello, he says. Can you hear me, Rebecca says, her words clipped and staticky. Before Simon can respond, the line goes dead. He doesn't call back. He sits still in the pickup, holding the phone to his chest, watching his shirt darken with blood around his thigh. Simon doesn't know Andrew Huntley very well. They work in different departments. Huntley is a technician, a subordinate, Simon a manager in charge of a sizable crew. But they've spoken over the years at holiday parties and company picnics. Huntley is younger than he is, early 40s, long-faced and slender, with large, knuckly hands. He has an affable smile and keeps his dark hair combed flat against his head. A womanizer of sorts, Simon remembers thinking, though he can't recall anything he's heard or anything Andrew Huntley has ever said or done that might have given him this impression. Besides, Huntley's married, isn't he? Simon is sure he's met his wife at one of those parties, one of those picnics, a blondish woman with, he calls to mind somewhat ashamedly, larger than average breasts. She and Rebecca hit it off, he seems to think. He doesn't remember any children and hopes they don't have any. He looks at the fire now, at the black hive of smoke, tilted as if on an axis. He begins to question his perception, his memory. He did see a man in his rearview mirror, didn't he? He did see Andrew Huntley, right? Maybe not. It's possible that his brain played a trick on him, fear and confusion commingling to produce a fleeting hallucination. It's possible that there was nobody there at all. But the fragment keeps playing in Simon's head. Huntley in full stride, his arms sweeping back and forth, then gone. It was automatic, the way Simon tore off through the desert, save for his brief thought about stopping, an animal effort of self-preservation. Rebecca would be horrified if she ever found out. So would his children, Daniel and Michaela, grown now and critical of him. What he did will remain a secret then, a guilt that will haunt him. Simon knows this. He feels the way he's imagined he would after an act of infidelity. He's never come close to committing one in the 25 years he and Rebecca have been married, but he's thought many times of how he might feel immediately following such a transgression. And it is this feeling exactly, the sourness below his tongue, the tightness in his throat, the kind of queasiness he gets after drinking coffee on an empty stomach. At the same time, he can hardly admit it to himself. He has an overwhelming sense of good fortune. Here they still are, the plain elemental beauty of the desert before him, the mounting pain in his leg. He knows how lucky he is to experience these things, to live and to breathe. Okay, so the final chapter I'll read, and this one's very short. It's called Maddie. So Maddie is the fourth principal character. Maddie is Andrew Huntley's daughter. So again, Andrew's the one who dies. Maddie's his daughter. And what happens later in the book is that Russell, the first character driving home from the tavern, Russell and Maddie. So again, Russell was Andrew's best friend. Russell and Maddie end up taking off on a road trip together through the Nevada desert. So Maddie is 16, Russell's in his late 40s, and they leave town together. They're both grieving, and they're kind of overwhelmed by this disaster and by the loss of Andrew. And one day on a whim, they just leave town with nothing but a couple of sleeping bags and a tent. And so the majority of their narrative is this desert road trip they take to these small towns heading up to Reno. Okay. They won't let her go. They've summoned her here and told her the accident took place at the plant where her father works. They pulled her out of class, AP Biology, and presented her with this information, only to hand her a cup of water and show her to a couch. Maddie can hear them whispering around the corner, though she can't unravel the words. Mrs. Skinner, the office secretary, and Dean Langan. Maddie has called home several times by now. She's tried her mother and her father on their cell phones, tried her mother at her practice, but the lines are all tied up. Less than an hour ago, Maddie and 24 of her fellow students watched the distant explosions through the old bowed windows of their 6th floor lab. They rushed from their stools during the first lengthy boom, just in time to see the smoke topple upward. Now she can't help feeling that she's being kept in the dark. Is her father injured? Dead? Maddie cries, drying her eyes with the sleeves of her shirt. She tries to picture him, but the image won't sit still, spinning willfully into vibrant schemes of color that flash in the darkness of her mind's eye. She listens to the whispers, hating them both. Mrs. Skinner with her matted fake blonde hair, her pear-shaped nose, her long and narrow teeth, and Dean Langan with his bald cylindrical head and dull-witted smile. Orchestral music plays faintly on an old portable CD player atop Mrs. Skinner's desk. Maddie hears what sounds like the local news coming from a television somewhere in the depths of the office, from the lunchroom maybe. But like the whispering, the words are indecipherable. There's a disinfected smell to the coffee table, an odor of cleanser or lemon oil that tickles Maddie's throat as she breathes. A water cooler stands in the corner, and she keeps getting up for more water, draining cup after cup. She's been here only 4 or 5 times before, in passing. Maddie prides herself on her general adherence to rules and on her perfect record of attendance and near perfect grade point average, 3.95. She's an academic scholarship student, president of her class. She plays flute in the marching band. She runs for the varsity cross-country team. She secretly maintains a long list of words she's looked up in the dictionary, using them in conversation whenever she can. In her almost 3 years at Bishop Delaney High, she's never done anything that might have warranted a trip to the dean's office. "Excuse me," she says, scooting to the edge of the couch. "Mrs. Skinner, hello? Can someone tell me what's going on, please?" Dean Langan appears from around the corner. "Hi, Maddie," he says. He sits down beside her, rests his palms on his knees. "We still haven't gotten hold of your parents. Do you have any idea where your mother might be?" "At her office is where she should be. How would I know?" She's never spoken to the teachers or administrators of her school with anything but the highest respect, and it startles her to answer him in the bitchy tone she reserves for arguments with her mother. Maddie is still crying. She wipes her nose with the back of her hand. Dean Langan stands up from the couch and plucks a yellow tissue from a box at the corner of Mrs. Skinner's desk. "Please," he says, extending an arm. Maddie blows her nose. "We're going to keep trying," Dean Langan says. "If you'd like to talk with one of the school counselors, you're welcome to do that." "I'm fine," she says. "Feel free to lie down as well, okay?" He nods at the couch, then goes back around the corner. Through the window across the waiting room, Maddie can see a few dark leaves eddying in the breeze, vestiges of autumn. A chautauqua tree shaped like a tuning fork from a plot in the concrete. Fat pink flowers droop from the branches, the petals like stockings hung to dry. As she tries a second time to picture her father, a memory comes to her from a far compartment of her mind. The two of them lying beneath the big woolly dogwood in her backyard, to whose gray ridged trunk her father nailed 3 cherry wood steps so that Maddie could climb with ease to the lowest branches. She is nestled in her strawberry shortcake sleeping bag now on a warm April night in 2003. Her father, she can almost see his face, almost, is stretched out beside her on the wrinkled blue tarp he spread across the grass, his own sleeping bag in a roll beneath his head. Yard camping, something he did with his own father throughout his boyhood. Yamping, her father would call it, in a clownish voice, and Maddie would laugh. They're looking up into a gnarl of branches illuminated by his flashlight. The dogwood is in full bloom. In a kind of reverential silence, her father moves the beam slowly across the inner canopy, while Maddie watches the flowers appear and disappear, white and cross-like. They seem to go on forever. "Don't ever forget how much I love you," he tells her, with reference to nothing, something foreboding in his tone. "I won't," Maddie replies. "No matter what," he says, "no matter what happens." "No matter what," Maddie says. Wherever the beam wanders, an ivory bouquet hangs striking and motionless in the little circle of light. She's 8 years old, and she imagines the flower-covered branches reaching as far as the eye can see, traversing the globe until they converge somewhere on the other side. Maddie wishes she could recall more of that night, one of many she spent camping in back of the house with her father. As she stares at the chautauqua tree outside, she begins to wonder what her life would be like without him. Dean Langan appears again from around the corner. "We're still trying your mom," he says softly. Maddie doesn't look at him. A violent urge rises inside her, the urge to stand and strike him. Where in the world is her mother? "I want to go home," she says, trying her best to withhold her tears. "I need to go." "We can't just let you leave in a situation like this. I'm sorry, Maddie. The school's on lockdown. You'll have to wait here until we reach one of your parents, I'm afraid. Mrs. Skinner will be out in a minute." He pats her shoulder and walks away. Maddie gets up from the couch and goes to the window. It's just barely open, air whistling through the dusty screen. She watches as the breeze continues to toss the left-behind leaves. After a moment, she opens the window all the way, pops the screen from the frame, and climbs out. It was her only means of leaving if she wanted to avoid the security guards at each of the school's 2 gilded gates. In the near distance, beyond the practice field, Maddie can see the section of fence she'll have to scale to complete her getaway. She hurries past the chautauqua tree, through the faculty parking lot, and across the empty field. The rails of the fence taper to pointed tips, and she places her feet on the soldered spirals and hoists herself up and over. There's a meadow on the other side, emerald blades of grass as long as yardsticks. They sweep her bare knees as she runs, birdsong filling the air, dark smoke brooding over the mountains. The meadow dwindles to a spread of tussocks, and then the grass vanishes entirely at a stand of junipers, beyond which lies a short length of desert. Maddie starts through the dirt. She's in exceptional shape. Since late November, when the cross-country season ended, she's logged 30 to 40 miles each week on her own, rising early every morning. All the same, she's breathing heavily. She doesn't own a car. Her mother shuttles her to and from school, or she bums rides off friends, and this is the quickest way home. A straight line to her neighborhood, but a good distance nonetheless, 3 or 4 miles. She can feel the big toe of her left foot butting against the leather of her black penny loafer, and she can already feel a dull cramp in her side. But she keeps running, her loafers turning the dirt, pebbles gathering in the hollows of her arches. As though competing in a steeplechase, she hurdles Bursage and weaves through the dark volcanic rocks. Again, Maddie cries. She is certain her father is dead. She can feel it, the weight of his absence, slowing her now as she runs, pushing her earthward. She can sense his sudden non-existence in the world. Thank you very much. So I'll check the chat room again and see if there are any questions. Let's see.
I think we got a few.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want me to read them, chat, or is that how you want to do it, or and then I can answer?
Yeah, I can read them.
Okay.
From Kathleen here, it looks like, I'm curious about the structure of your story. How did you determine how to introduce your characters, by chapter, by elements of the event? And does it change as you intertwine their relationships to each other?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'll begin by saying, don't ever write a book with 4 points of view, because it's the hardest thing that I've ever done. It was just a nightmare making that structure work. They say that you learn how to write a novel by writing one, and that's absolutely true. I had no idea what I was doing when I started it, and it took me about 7 years to finish a draft, and that was writing about 3 hours a day, 5 days a week for 7 years, and I rarely took a week off. And of course, a lot of that was rewriting and restructuring. But if I was in my office at Creighton, I'd show you some of the storyboards that I used. I had about 3 or 4 big ones, and I just had to use them at some point, about 50 pages in, because the structure was so difficult to manage and to keep in my head that I had to just kind of have it all laid out in front of me. So I had them hanging in my office on the wall as I was drafting the book. But essentially the structure is an even balance between all 4 points of view. So the novel toggles back and forth between Russell, Emma, Simon, and Maddie, and then Russell, Emma, Simon, and Maddie. It was really important to me to balance them. I wanted to have 4 principal characters, sort of 4 equal protagonists. Again, it's a terrible idea. I think it worked out okay in the end, at least I hope, but the writing of it was just so intensely difficult. Essentially what I had to do was I had to create 4 separate narrative arcs that are braided together and that all come together in kind of the same climactic moment, which was really difficult. So I think if you were to lift any one of the 4 arcs out of the book and kind of set it aside, it should sort of read as its own story. But I didn't write the novel that way. I wrote the novel toggling back and forth between the points of view. So it was really hard to kind of really just to balance them. And the book just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I thought, oh my God, should I cut 2 of these and just have 2 main characters? But I was so far now that I couldn't do that because it would have just changed everything. I would have had to rewrite the whole novel. So at one point, I think it ballooned to, God, I don't know, 350, maybe 400 pages. The published version is only 230 pages. So, and a lot of what I cut was to kind of compress and shrink the climax and then the resolution chapters. So those chapters in the book, those about 8 chapters, are fairly short. And it took me a long time to kind of figure out how to do that. But I read a lot of novels around the time that have multiple points of view that are kind of equally shared. And I was trying to figure out kind of how to do it, and also to avoid doing the same things that a lot of these other novels had done. But that's the best advice I can give anybody who wants to write any kind of novel. Just read a bunch of novels that are like the one you want to write, and that'll help you learn how to write that kind of novel, and also help you repeat what other people have already accomplished.
Yep.
I hope that answers your question.
Oh, that was good. And that was one of my other questions too, because I had a few fiction people in here. And yeah, within the fiction workshop. So I was definitely going to kind of pick your brain on any advice for them.
Okay.
Any like that. We got another one. Let's take a look. Elijah's got a question here. Other than the events you referenced about your father's power plant, were there any other real events or themes that were used for inspiration?
Not really any real events. Although I would say that, like I said, I grew up in Las Vegas, and like a lot of people, I didn't really like where I grew up. I kind of hated my hometown, and only when I left did I realize how interesting the place was. And so I write about it all the time now. In fact, every story in my collection, except I think 1 or 2, are set in Las Vegas. And obviously the novel is. All my fiction is or most of my fiction is set there. Some of my nonfiction as well. I just sort of became obsessed with it when I left. And so there are no actual real events in the book aside from the explosion, but so much of what I describe in the book is based on memories I have from my childhood. So places that where I used to hang out. I grew up in a neighborhood that bordered the Mojave Desert, in the sense that quite literally, if you were to walk 2 blocks from my house and hop the fence in one of my neighbor's backyards, you would be in the desert. And if you just kept walking, you would hit mountains, and then you'd end up in California. I mean, there was nothing beyond our neighborhood. So this is in 1979. We moved there from New York. And now it's all very developed. But back then, we used to hop my neighbor's fence, my buddies and I would, and we would just walk out in the desert. When I was like 9, 10 years old, there was no parental supervision in the 70s. Yeah. And we would catch whip snakes and lizards and horny toads and scorpions. And we'd catch them in these big water cooler bottles, and then feed beetles and crickets in there, and watch scorpions eat these things. And so I have all of these great memories of just growing up in the desert. I mean, I'm not kidding, just running wild out there. So a lot of the scenes that I describe in the book that take place in the desert are based on memories I have of that place. I went out there, about 5 years ago to do some research on the novel. And I brought back a bunch of volcanic rocks and sandstone rocks and like pieces of a tumbleweed that I have sitting on my desk at Creighton. And so those kind of inspired me, because that's the stuff the physical stuff I grew up with. And all that stuff populates the novel to a large degree.
Cool. Let's see here. Christina Kaufman, she said she joined a little bit late. Didn't know this was based on real events, so very cool. What else we got? I guess you talked a little bit about this. I guess I want to follow up just about, I guess, how this book came about, but you talked a little bit about that memory, I guess, with your father. I think you were talking about that, but let's see here.
Yeah, my dad, so my dad died when I was 20. So his death had nothing to do with the explosion at his plant. That was years before. But he died when I was relatively young. And, he's just always been a source of I guess, fiction. I mean, so many of my stories are about experiences I had with my dad, or based on experiences I had with my dad, memories I have of him. And of course, when I write about him in the realm of fiction, I will invent a lot as well. But often a story or a chapter in the novel will begin with kind of some memory I had of my father. So yeah, he was my dad, so obviously he was a pretty pivotal person in my life, and I kind of go back to memories of him constantly when I'm stuck for ideas, or I'm just looking to figure out what I want to write about, or I'm trying to come up with a character. I'll think about him, and he's a pretty interesting guy, really smart guy, pretty funny guy, and so yeah, a lot of my work kind of stems from memories I have of my dad.
Well, that's neat too, because it kind of captures that moment, and by bringing it into that book, that kind of memory or part of that memory. That's a neat way of just capturing that. So cool.
I got a question for you. Have you thought about writing a screenplay for this book? Because it sounds like it would translate onto this big screen pretty well.
Yeah, I've never written a screenplay. I don't know how to do it. Although my agent sells. He has kind of a pretty good track record of selling novels to I don't know, I guess to producers and directors who option them. And he's sent it out a few places. We haven't gotten any bites yet. But God, that would be a dream. Yeah, I wouldn't know what the heck I'm doing, but if someone could coach me and teach me how to do it, I'd be happy to write a screenplay. I've always written, I think, in a pretty cinematic fashion, and I don't say that to kind of pat myself on the back, but just that I tend to think in terms of images, as a lot of fiction writers do, and poets as well, of course. And when I'm writing, I do a lot of what I call deep imagining. So I'll literally stop typing and back away from the keyboard, and I'll sit with my eyes closed and get into kind of a meditative state and just see everything I want to describe. And I'll do this over and over again in a 3-hour writing session, such that I have these photos in my head and I'm just kind of transcribing what I see. And I think the book does have, kind of a really sort of cinematic feel to it, or at least I wanted it to. I certainly hope it does. I always like to write a scene that as I'm reading it as the writer, I kind of feel like I'm walking through it. I feel like there's a camera attached to my forehead, and I'm kind of meandering through this place. And that's always my goal. So.
Cool. Wonderful. We got another one from Kathleen here. Do you spend a lot of time fleshing out the sense details you include in your narrative?
The sensory details, yeah, a lot of time. I'm a really slow writer. I tend to be pretty meticulous with my sentences, and in a writing session of 3 hours, I'd be lucky if I wrote usually half a page. I typically don't even get to half a page, and I don't take breaks. I might take a quick break to go to the restroom or get a cup of coffee, but I log the minutes that I'm away from the desk, and I clock back in, and I work till I get to 3 hours. And in that amount of time, if I hit a page, that's a really good day. And so the reason I mention that is I will, in terms of sensory detail, I'll usually write a sentence, and then I'll write 2 or 3 versions of the same sentence, kind of flipping it around, changing, moving phrases around, substituting words in for other words, using the thesaurus and the dictionary, looking words up, making sure that they mean exactly what I want them to mean. And a lot of this is really for the purpose of getting the sensory detail right. But also for the purpose of getting the poetry and the rhythm and the cadence of the sentence down, and kind of getting it to where I want it to be. Very often, in terms of sensory detail, the prose itself will dictate content. So what I mean by that is when I'm trying to describe, let's say I'm describing, I don't know, a flower, right? I'm describing how a flower smells. Maybe maybe I use a 3-syllable word to describe the smell. And then the next sentence I write, when I read those 2 sentences together, that 3-syllable word throws off the whole rhythm of the paragraph. The poetry is gone. It's not hitting the right number of beats. So then I'll go back and I'll change the adjective to a 2-syllable adjective instead. And that might change the whole description of the flower, the whole description of the odor. And then maybe it won't even be a flower at all anymore. Maybe it'll turn into a creosote bush, just based on the number of syllables I need for that sentence. So that's often how I come up with sensory, well, really with any kind of detail for any scene. So what I say about that is, a lot of fiction writers talk about writing sentences this way. I tend to write by ear. I don't write, my sentences are never dictated by content. I have an idea of what I want a scene to be and where I want it to go, but the sentences always depend on the sound of the sentences that have come before them. And then that tends to dictate what happens in the narrative, oddly enough.
Huh. Do you kind of have an idea where the book's going to end? So I know some people like plan it out, but others kind of let it see where it goes. And you might talk a little bit about this, but.
No, not really. I don't. I take tons and tons and tons of notes. I take a lot of notes. I'm working on a new novel right now, and this is about almost 100 pages of notes for one chapter. Oh, wow. That I'm working on. And but what I do is I can't stop writing down ideas, right? But when I actually write, I'll just push the notes aside, and so I keep them in a folder artfully titled New Novel. And I don't usually open the folder. I don't think I've looked at any of these. So I kind of have this plan, right? That's really vague and really skeletal. And the plan is just this file of notes. But when I'm actually writing, I want to allow the narrative to unfold on its own. If I start writing from a blueprint or an outline, or I start looking too much at the notes, what invariably happens is I end up corralling my characters into these preconceived situations that they don't want to be in. And so I always want to avoid that. I always want the novel or the story or whatever it is to be organic and to feel real and to allow the characters to surprise me. I think of writing as a leap of faith and an act of discovery. It's like a marriage, right? You fall in love with someone, you get married, and you hope it's going to work out, but it might not. It's a big leap of faith, but it's also an act of discovery, right? You learn who the person is as you grow old together. And writing a novel or a short story, I think, is no different. You take this big risk, and but you discover the thing as you go, and you kind of will it to happen in the end. So I don't ever really know how it's going to turn out, but what I do think a lot about is willing it to end. I don't ever want to give up on the project, even if it's bad, even if I know it's bad. I'll finish the story and then never look at it again. But if I give up on one of them, I'll give up on all of them. I'll never finish another one. So.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you're not supposed to do this, but a little sneak peek. What are you interested? What are you working on right now, or what's kind of the theme or topic of the new novel?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to talk about it. So I read this article in Outside Magazine a couple years ago about a woman named Letha Robertson, and she is the foremost hunter of mountain lions in the United States. And she happens to live in upstate Nevada, in a little town called Manhattan, Nevada, which is close to Reno. And I know that part of the state fairly well, and I've been up there a bunch of times. And I was just fascinated by the article about this woman. She's about 45 years old. She's divorced, and she spends all her time hunting. And then when she's not hunting, she works in a gold mine, and she drives a bulldozer up and down these precipitous cliff walls at a gold mine. That's what she does for a living. And pardon my French, but she's just a badass. And I thought, this is amazing. And so I wanted to interview her, and I didn't even know what I wanted to write about. I just thought, I just want to talk to this woman. So I found her information, and I called her and I said, hey, I'm a writer. I'm looking for a new project. Can I interview you? I don't know, maybe it'll work. Maybe it'll turn into something, maybe not. And so we talked for a while, and I took a bunch of notes. And so I started this novel that is based on the disappearance of a child in upstate Nevada. And so it begins with a little boy playing on a snowy evening one night in December. He's playing out in front of his house. And we learn that there's a rabid mountain lion on the loose. And by the end of the prologue, the boy has disappeared. And so the local police chief hears about this famous mountain lion hunter who lives in a different part of the state. And he commissions her to come and track down this mountain lion to try to recover the boy's body. And when Jesse, the mountain lion hunter, gets there, it turns out it's a woman, and the police chief thought it was a man. This is kind of a sexist, misogynist community, and or at least the men are. And so it turns out it's a woman when she gets there, and so there's kind of some tension there. But anyway, he pays her to go find this mountain lion, and of course, as she tries to track this mountain lion, she learns that more nefarious things are afoot, and actually the boy was probably not taken by this mountain lion and by someone else in the town. And so the novel kind of unfolds from there.
It sounds cool.
So it's a little different than what I'm working on right now. That's going to be my screenplay, buddy.
Yeah.
Nice.
I might turn that one into a screenplay.
Oh yeah.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Yeah. What else, Bonnie?
I don't know. It's what, 5? It's 5. So I don't know. I don't want to keep this young man here.
I'm in no hurry, but if people want to wrap it up, that's fine too. It's up to you guys.
We got a lot of people here. Any last questions?
Yeah, post them if you got them. I kind of had
too.
one. I know this. What are some of your influences, if you don't mind me asking? You have any writers you really are liking right now, or kind of influenced you when you started writing?
Yeah, absolutely. So probably the three writers who influenced me most when I was younger were J.D. Salinger, Raymond Carver, and Tom Jones. So Tom Jones is maybe a little known writer at this point, but back in the 90s, he was a pretty well-known short story writer. And all three of those writers were kind of the three that really got me into writing when I was in high school and college. And then as I got older, I started reading a lot of Ann Beatty, who I love, Joyce Carol Oates. Toni Morrison's novel Sula was a huge influence on me. Just that one book alone. Got a writer named Charles D'Ambrosio, who doesn't publish much anymore, but he used to publish short stories in the New Yorker a lot. James Dickey's Deliverance has been a big influence on me over the years. That's one that I always go back to. Winter's Bone, that one novel in particular, such a big influence on me. I just love that novel. Cormac McCarthy has always been a big influence, although I don't think my writing is anything like his, but he kind of inspires me to write about the West.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, he makes it exciting.
Yeah.
And I like his writing. It's kind of bleak, but it's sparse too. It's kind of fun.
Yeah. And I still continue to be influenced by writers. One of the things that I talk about a lot in class is, Harold Bloom's seminal work of criticism, the anxiety of influence. So that book is all about how we're always standing on the shoulders of giants, and we can never write anything truly original because we're always being influenced by those who came before us. I think it was in the early 2000s, the novelist Jonathan Lethem wrote a response to that book, an essay that he published in the New Yorker called "The Ecstasy of Influence," and the whole essay is about how, why should we feel anxiety about those who have influenced us? Why not celebrate that, and why not be honest and open about the writers that we've borrowed from or stolen from or learned from? And that's how I feel. So one of the things I talk about a lot in class is this idea that I consciously allow myself to be influenced. In fact, when I'm writing, so right now I've got this is my writing desk. I've got 5 novels sitting on my writing desk right here. And the only reason these books are here is so that I can leaf through them as I'm writing and just read random passages and be influenced by them. So I've got Cormac McCarthy's No Country for Old Men, Descent by Tim Johnston, Winter's Bone, Richard Ford's The Ultimate Good Luck, Hold the Dark. And, these are books that they have the same tone as the one I'm working on right now. But I'll just open up a passage and read a page to myself, and it inspires me to write. And it's not that I'm going to sort of copy the style or mimic it or anything, but it influences me in the sense that, what I usually think is I'll think, okay, that's a great paragraph. written by a mere mortal like me. You know, this person isn't a god. This person learned to write just like I did. So if he was capable of doing that, I'm capable of doing it too. So it's kind of inspiring and influential at the same time. But I really believe in that part of the process. And I tell my students a lot, you know, model your work after the writers that you love. Allow yourself to learn from them. Don't write in a vacuum. You know, don't sort of write according to your own true voice, whatever that means, right? Allow yourself to borrow and steal from other writers. I believe in it wholeheartedly.
Yep. I'm with you.
Don't you have difficulty though, if you're trying to write and then you stop and read a little bit and go back to your writing and then you stop and read a little bit? It's probably just personal preference, but I would get lost.
Yeah. I know what you mean. You know, I'm not, it doesn't ever hinder me because I don't gush when I write. I'm so painstakingly slow. In fact, I wish I could write more quickly. I used to in my 20s, you know, when I wrote my first book, my collection of short stories, I used to write a lot more quickly. And I have these romantic memories of myself sitting at my desk in New York City and just sort of typing furiously. And I would do that. I would sit there and type for like 2 or 3 hours. And I just can't do it anymore. I'm so slow now. I think I put far too much pressure on every sentence now, and I kind of can't get out of that habit. So, you know, really when I'm taking breaks to read, it's often just because I can't write the next sentence. Like nothing good is coming and I'm sort of stuck. So I'm just sitting there staring out the window and I might as well do some reading. But almost always when I read a little bit, in the middle of writing, I'll think, wow, that was a really beautiful sentence. I want to try to outdo that. So, you know, there's a big part of me, and I think a lot of artists in general probably feel this way. I mean, I know painter friends of mine and musician friends of mine talk about this too, but there's a big part of me that thinks of writing as a competition. And I hate to kind of put it in those terms, but I do sort of think, okay, this guy's pretty good. He's pretty damn good. I really like that paragraph. I want to try to be better. I want to try to write something as good as or better than that. And of course, you know, I'm not better than Cormac McCarthy, right? You know, I'm not better than Daniel Woodrell, but I strive to be.
Yep.
And you know, I think that's a really useful attitude to have when you're sending out work too. You know, I was an editor at the Iowa Review when I was in graduate school, and we would quite literally have 1,000 manuscripts in a stack at a time. And somehow you had to get through those. And the only way to get through them was to toss it in the recycling bin if it wasn't as good as the last one you read. And so when I'm writing, I'm always thinking, okay, I'm in competition with all these other writers, and my story is going to be in a stack with all these other stories. I've got to be really, really good to get noticed. And I think that helps me raise my standards, and it helps me write better. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing in the end, even though it sounds, I'm not a competitive person. Like I grew up playing basketball, and the reason I was never very good was that I'd get in a game and I really wouldn't care who won. I just wanted to get home and, I don't know, eat dinner. So in other ways, I'm not competitive at all, but in this one way, I always have been.
Yeah. Cool. That's good.
Good.
Yeah. No, this is.
Are these answers too long-winded?
Oh, no,
is that more than you wanted to know?
I'm just like, Bonnie, I'm glad you're recording this. It's good. No, man, this is what I wanted to hear. So I think a lot of people really enjoy hearing this stuff. So you're hitting all the marks. I'm trying to see how we doing here. A few people left.
Yeah, we're at 15.
Any more questions out there? Let's see.
Nope. Well, Dave, I gotta say this has been a fabulous reading. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you read well.
I really appreciate that. That's so kind of you to say. Thanks a lot, and it was so kind of both of you to have me read. So appreciative, and thanks to everybody who tuned in and listened.
Yep. Now we're getting some claps from Sharon. So yeah, you were up on a projection screen somewhere on campus. So okay. We got some students listening.
All right, great.
See, but yeah, thank you so much, and this has been great, Bonnie. It's been good semester here doing the reading with you. Northeast Community College and Wayne State College coming together. But Dave, we'll get you up sometime and do a slam or something. We can hopefully, like we were talking about, actually have you up here and we can have dinner sometime and
I'd love it.
Talk some more. It'd be great.
Yeah, it'd be nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love it. And if either of you are in Omaha, let me know. I've got a fire pit in front of my house, and we can sit out front and have a beer.
That'd be cool. That'd be wonderful.
Great.
All right, guys, thanks so much. And hey, if anybody else has any questions at all that come to you, feel free to send me an email. I'd be happy to respond.
That's great. That's good of you.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, have a good one.
Yep. Cheers. All right.
All right.
A
Hold
few-
up here. Let's see. I want to